Welcome, everyone. Please take your time finishing getting food. The rule in CTRL events, as either you know or you now know, you knew or you'll now know, is if you want more food and someone is speaking, it's okay. Get up, help yourself.
We won't call you.
Welcome to this, our last day in the August CTRL teaching technology and research rendition of workshops and luncheons for 2016. Just a couple of things before we get started with the program. You'll notice a slew of papers on your tables. Take a look at them. You may find some things that you didn't know about. You may find some things you knew about and said, oh, yes, I meant to pursue that. Have a look at them sometime before you leave, and you're welcome to take, obviously, whatever you want with you. I'll also mention, because this, I think, will please Anna, and appropriately so, there will be evaluations. You were handed a little piece of paper. Before you leave, you can take more dessert, but before you leave, please fill out the evaluations. It helps us know how we do our planning for subsequent events. Today's event is a particularly important one because it gives us an opportunity to think about our first-year students. Some of you are going to be teaching first-year students. Some have taught first-year students. Some are teaching students who were first-year students last year, the year before. And guess what? A lot of the issues you're going to be hearing about today very much apply to them as well. So the official title of our luncheon is Teaching First-Year Students, Challenges and Opportunities. I will make only the short introduction of the person who is organizing everything, not for the first time, Fanta Ock, who's Assistant Vice President of Campus Life and Hearst Senior Professorial Lecturer in the School of International Service. And Fanta will introduce our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you to everyone. I'm amazed that whenever I come to Maryland or Naomi and I'm like, I have an idea, they're not running away from me. They probably will start to do so. But I appreciate the collaboration on a lot of these efforts. So thanks to the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning. It is truly an honor for me to be with this group of colleagues and to talk to you about teaching first-year students. It came up for me because I would have conversations with faculty and they're like, we're finding that our classroom is changing. And sometimes we can put our fingers on it. Other times we're not sure what's going on, but we know that there's something that's different. By the same token, as I would speak to students about their first year experience at American University, I would hear from them, if only, fill in the blank. And I thought, well, there has to be a way for us to bring together good teachers and folks who care about teaching and have a conversation of how can we continue to be better teachers. We're always on the learning path. There's always more to learn from our colleagues. And so it's really in that spirit that we're having this panel today. I'm mindful also of time because I know some of you have a session to go to. For those who are not necessarily going to a session, I know some of us will remain in this room to continue the conversation one-on-one as needed. So without further ado, let me introduce my fellow panelists, and then I'll set the stage and context, and then they'll take it from there. There's Lara Schwartz. Lara has become sort of a partner in crime very quickly. Once I had heard about Lara and her work at AU, I was like, I have got to get to know her more, and it's been great to know of her work and her passion for this area of work. And Lara teaches in the University College program, but she's also the director of the SPA Honors Program as well, and does a lot of work with first-year students and being very creative about how to sort of set the tone for the classroom, et cetera. There's Rose Schinkel. Rose is also another dear colleague. Rose wears multiple hats in the School of International Service. She's the undergraduate program director. She's also the acting associate dean for curriculum in SIS and many other hats. And someone who is deeply passionate about working with students and really helping with their development. So I'm glad that she could join us today. Chris Tudge. Chris is an associate professor in biology. He's also the director of the AU Honors Program. And when I talk to students who are in biology or other discipline and they're taking biology, and I'm like, so who do you take biology classes with? They always talk about Chris. So he is quite famous among students in the sciences for his work and how he really gets students to begin to love the sciences, and also happens to teach large class sizes, because we've heard when we did it the last time, there were some things about, well, what happens when we have large class sizes? Like, how can we do this work in large class sizes as opposed to seminars? So he can offer that perspective as well. Last and certainly not least, and will certainly be the first one to speak after I create the context, I wanted to do something different this time. I'm always struck that, we spend a lot of time talking about how do we work with students, but I'm also mindful of the fact that the student voice is not always present. And I'm very mindful of that and want to make sure that we can bring some student voices to the table. And not necessarily that one voice represents all, but I always feel that whenever we can, I'd like to have a student at the table. And so we're very fortunate that Tom Cavalier was willing to do so. Tom is coming early enough for this, so I really appreciate him being here with us. Tom is an undergraduate student, a rising sophomore, so he has just lived very well his first year experience at American University, and it's great that he's back with us here for this fall. And Tom is also the on the undergraduate council for SIS, and is the director for the academic affairs side of it. So he's really the right person to have at the table as well. And he'll provide his personal reflections and perspective on what the first year was and what he's learned from that. So with that said, I'm going to begin by creating a little bit the context for today. And I'm going to provide you with just a couple of quick data sets, some of which some of you may have seen, but it's always good to have it reinforced, and others, it may be a first for you. So before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about who are the first-year students. Who are they? What do we know about them? What do we need to know more about them? First of all, as you must have heard from our folks in admissions and everywhere else, the admitted freshman class has been the most selective class in our history. Only 26% of students who applied to American University were admitted. Most selective class. You also see in terms of their GPA, the admitted profile was 3.76 weighted GPA, and the deposit was 3.67. So just to say, a very strong class when you look at it on the academic front. In terms of colleges and where are they located, where are these students, you will notice that College of Arts and Sciences has 26.9% of the entering class, and then you'll also notice School of International Service has 29.6% of the entering class, and you have School of Public Affairs with 21.8%. You have College of Kogod with 11, and SOC with 10.6. That's the distribution by school of our incoming class for this fall in terms of first-year students. What is the profile of the first-year class? In terms of American, Indian, Native American, really, 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 really small, right? Only 6 at this stage. Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders represent about 7.4% of the entering class. African Americans, Black, is 8.6%. Hispanic Latino, fastest growing segment of our community, really growing quite rapidly. It's at 15%. Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders is, again, very small. And then multiracial, those who have self-identified as multiracial, is 1%. So all in terms of looking at minority communities, it's about 32%. That's quite large for our size. There's still, and it continues to grow each year, but I wanted you to have that for context in terms of who the entering class is. First generation is about 9.5% of our incoming students are first generation college students, and then look at the gender imbalance here. Women represent 64% and men 35%. So when you start thinking about where are the men, you'll know that in your classes, this is very much what we have here. And then in terms of states represented, you will see that Mid-Atlantic is big for us, 40%. But for those who've been at AU for a while, that continues to decline quite a bit. We used to be predominantly a Mid-Atlantic institution, and that continues to decline. And then you'll see that the South continues to be a growth area for us with 14.5%. The West is also growing rapidly for us. As a matter of fact, we will have a full-time person that will be working out of California for recruitment purposes only, because there's that much growth with California alone. But the West is 13%, and then you'll see that the international is at 6.3%. That's just to give you a sense of the regional and other sort of information about profile of students. Clearly, these are not the only things, but I wanted to give you just a snapshot of what you have in front of you. With that said, also, some of you will have transfer students because given the number of credits that they're taking, they may take general education courses, and with the transfer population, it is a much more diverse population in terms of race and ethnicity, but also in terms of first generation as well. You'll see that 15% of our transfer students are Pell eligible. These are very high need students financially. That's about 15% of our entering class. You see that first generation represents 19% of transfer students are first generation college. Most of them are coming from the DC metro area. So we draw a lot from schools in the area because we have articulation agreements with them. So that's why you see that large draw. And then you'll also notice there that, for example, African American population is about 13% with transfers, whereas with first-year students it was about 7%. So you'll see that there's a shift there when it comes, and also international is at 22% of our transfer students are international. So that you are aware also of transfer students, particularly who may be taking your classes in terms of first year because of the general education requirements, et cetera. So that's a little bit of the profile. Then I want to talk about the financial profile, because this is something that you as faculty need to have in terms of just background information. AU has really made a commitment to try to close the gap, the financial gap of incoming students as much as possible, particularly for the very high need students, is to close it by 100%. Just to give you a sense, there was $31 million that the institution expended on financial aid alone. And for you, you may say, well, is that a lot? Is that not? What I can say to you is this is the largest we've expended for an entering class, especially considering that it's also a smaller class than what we've had before. So there's been much more dollars expended to get the class here than we've done in the past. And it was expended on the class, and it's really primarily focused on high need students and students with need. We shifted our financial aid strategy from merit to need. So 80% of our students who come in with the need being fulfilled rather than merit. That's been a major shift, strategic shift on the part of the university. So 81% of the class that deposited saying I'm coming to AU had some form of need or aid need. And 81% of those, we found a way to close that gap depending on how much their income was, depending on what was on the FAFSA, et cetera, et cetera. And out of that, 20% of that class are considered very high need. But I also want to say to you then there's another 20 to 22% that are considered high to medium need. So we don't want to forget about that group as well. So when we think about students in need, 20% are very high need, but we have also another 20 to 22% that really have need, and we don't want to forget about that. But also the contrast here is that the average family income is still 167%. So this notion of the haves and the have-not very much live on every given day on our campus, and you'll see it in so many ways how it plays out in terms of students who may come and say, textbooks may be a challenge for me. And where the social, it certainly impacts their social lives here on campus in terms of what you do on the weekends and are not able to do, et cetera, et cetera. So the financial profile is really important for you to be aware of. So keep in mind that out of this group, there's 28% who demonstrated no need. Now, the reason they demonstrated no need is either because they were international and they're not eligible for financial aid, that is certainly federal aid, that may be, but also the reason there's no need is because their income level is such that there was no justifiable need for that. Important to keep that in mind because it means at least 1 out of 4 students is without a need at all. So contrast those things in terms of socioeconomic background that lives on our campus here. So that's the financial profile. Then I want to finish quickly with one last thing. One of the things in student affairs and campus life that we do a lot of is we look at what are the trends and what's out there and how does it create context for it. One of the studies that's done each year and that's been done regularly is what is called the Beloit mindset. And what they do is they really kind of survey to understand what's sort of the mindset of the entering class. And this is done every year. And so this is some of the takeaways. There's about 60 of them. And I would encourage you to go to the website, the Beloit Mindset website, and you'll see what all of the 60s are. But I have picked up some of the ones that certainly come up for me. And I want to give you just a couple of snapshots of what some of those are. And this is for the class, meaning the 2020 class, meaning this entering class. And I want you to to keep that in the back of your minds as well. One is mostly born in 1998. I have to keep reminding myself of that. Because I'm dating myself a lot, and I'm like, wow, 1998. Okay. For them, the Sandy Hook tragedy is their Columbine. Just think about time, right? This whole issue of time and space, right? That's their Columbine. The US has always been at war, as far as this generation and their memory can sort of capture, right? They've never had to watch or listen to programs at scheduled time. Think about a different notion of time, right? And what you do and when, and what you have access to, and when you want to have access to it. That's one thing. Each year they've been alive, the US population has grown by more than 1 million Latinos. That was an interesting fact for me, because it was certainly something I had no idea about. To reach them, you better send a text. Emails are often ignored. I know that firsthand because I'll be sending an email to a student, and I'm not hearing anything. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And then I'm sending another email. And then finally it dawned on me that email is really kind of passé for quite a few of them. Text message. And there was a study that was done that indicated that for sort of incoming students, they send more than 70 texts per day. More than 70 texts per day. That is the mode of communication. Airline tickets have always been purchased online. What does a ticket looks like? Cloning has always been a mundane laboratory procedure, right? I say this just to say, for context, it's important because with each group, there are things that are really etched in our memories and in our minds, and it's important for us to have a little bit of sense of who's coming through our doors and what do we know about them. And I would really encourage you to go and read the Beloit study because it's fun and it's quite well done. So that's something I would encourage you to think about and to look at. With that said, I'm going to also finish with a couple of quick slides. One is that what neighborhood are they coming from? We know that they come from predominantly what they would qualify as white neighborhood or only white neighborhood. So for our students coming into an environment like AU, there will be some real transitions on all aspects of it. That's another important one. How do they spend their time? Luckily, they do actually spend their time on homework. That's good news. But also you will notice, social media is very big in terms of, how many plus hours are spent on that as well. So that's another element. Our students will tell you what they think, and they'll tell you again what they think again and again. Politics is huge for them, but that's not for all of our students. So they're interested in other topics, and we certainly have those who remind us we're not all about politics here, and want to make sure we're reminded of that as well. And also, you will notice that very few describe themselves as conservative at AU, which makes the voice of our conservative students really that of a minority voice on AU campus. And they certainly talk about that and how that really in some ways can be intimidating in expressing their positions on issues because they're not sure how it's going to be received at a place like American, et cetera. So that's something else that I want us to remember. So I'm going to stop there and then say that's the context for our conversation of who they are, and then I'm going to have Lara pick up from here. Oh, student, sorry, I'm having Tom first. Tom is going to first tell us his experience.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy that I can share my perspective on the panel, and that definitely speaks to me because once I read that we've never bought airline tickets anywhere except online, the first thought I had was, where else would we buy them? So that definitely was pretty accurate. I call Connecticut home. I went to a private school for 4 years, not far from where I live. It's one of the oldest private schools in Connecticut and really had this close-knit community where the relationship between students and faculty was almost unprecedented. I mean, I came from a public middle school to go to a high school where the first thing my teacher did was put her cell phone number on the board so we could text or call her if we needed any help. So that was really strange for me. Also, it was a population of 350 to 400. So as you could imagine, that adjustment from there to here was also pretty big. But like AU, we were very diverse. We had over 34 countries represented among our student body. And it was really unique because despite that diversity, we were very, very, very close. And I never met anybody who resented another because of their nationality or political beliefs. And I think that is mostly attributed to the school spirit we had. And that school spirit was also something to adjust to coming to AU. Switching all my Cheshire Academy labeled clothing with AU labeled clothing was a pretty big deal. And I'm still not totally there yet. In high school, I was very much involved in extracurricular activities and was one of the most recognizable students on campus because of public speaking roles I had. And again, you know, as you could imagine, a small school where I was very recognizable and one of 350 to come and be one of 10,000 and start at the bottom was a pretty humbling experience and a little blow to my ego, which was good. But with my high school experience in mind, some of the expectations I had for college were that it would be somewhat similar. I mean, of course, I knew it was going to be different, but not quite as different as it was my first year, because as she mentioned, I'm a sophomore, so I'm fresh off the battlefield. I expected a much higher level of student to faculty relationship. It was really unique to me to kind of feel this gap between myself and the professor, which of course I knew, you know, our teachers in high school would say, you know, you're going to go to college and you're not going to get that same thing you have here, but it was definitely a really big shock to me. I also expected there to be clearer instructions on how to take advantage of all the campus resources. And I think part of it might have been myself, and it gets lost in all the, you know, buzz of activity during freshman year. You're kind of so busy acclimating and figuring out who you want your friends to be and figuring out, you know, which parties do I go to or what do I do. This kind of adjustment, I think, overrode my ability to see what resources were available on campus. And as I mentioned, the lack of school spirit to me was definitely the hardest. We don't have a football team, not that I even like sports, I don't like sports, but it was a football team that I really expected to bring that college community together, because all high school students, they picture college, they think, oh, there's big football games and games under the lights, and we had this in my high school, and you know, my first couple weeks, my RA said to me, goes, well, we don't have sports, our sports are internships. And I did really like that. That was a really good answer, I thought. But I did have to say, internships don't really foster a sense of community. And that was what I think was the biggest discrepancy between the two. And I also expected there to be an easier access to the extracurricular activities, in that, you know, as I said, I was very involved, and coming here, I expected, okay, well, if I want to do Model UN, then I show up and I try out, and I won awards in Model UN in high school, so I said, oh, it's going to be no big deal, and then I showed up, and then I got denied. And that was like, wow, I really have to learn not to rest on my laurels anymore, because I'm not as important as I thought I was. Mm-hmm. And I have to work for these things. I can't just want them. I have to figure out how I'm going to get it. And that was, again, pretty humbling. But I think a big difference between my high school experience and my first year in college was that in the latter halves, or the upper levels of high school, it's all preparing for college. What college you're going to go to, what essays are you going to write, are you doing this class so that you look good on the resume, do you have this GPA, is this class weighted, and it's all kind of coming together to try and make ourselves look really good on the Common App. And now that I'm in college, I said, okay, well, that's gone, thankfully, but now I have to kind of prepare for life. And that's definitely a much more stressful and mentally anguishing thing that's dangling over our heads. So I think that it's really important to understand the competitiveness first-year students feel, or at least I felt. And I spoke to some of my peers as well, and they agreed. It's coming into our first year and trying to figure out what direction to go, but we don't really know which way we're going. And that competitiveness on top of adjusting to this climate doesn't go well. And that, I think, is attributable to a lot of the stress and confusion that first-year students feel. So in regards to that adjustment, I think that some of the core pieces of advice I would offer as a former first-year student to better engage us in the classroom is that on top of understanding this competitiveness is to realize that a significant majority of us don't know in what direction we're going, even if we like a topic. I love international relations, I love political science, but starting off, I knew I liked that, but I didn't know how to apply it. I didn't know how to put it down on paper and say, okay, I like this, and then this is what I want. And of course, that's what first year is for. But I think it really becomes attributable to us not having found our passion yet. And I think that's really, really important. I think that's the one thing I kept thinking over and over again when I was reflecting on my first year. I didn't find my passion yet, and it took me a little while. I think it wasn't until the latter half of my second semester and over the summer I was fortunate enough to study abroad in Brussels and intern in the European Parliament, and this kind of real experience showed me, wow, this is what I like, and this is a real-life application of that passion. And now going back into the classroom for the upcoming semester, I feel much more confident that this passion is going to take me much further. And I think in the classroom, what's really important to engage us is for you as professors to show us your passion. And it doesn't have to be, this is what I did to get here, although that's important. It's just show us that enthusiasm you have for the subject, because even if I don't have that enthusiasm, I will see yours, and it can be really, really contagious. And especially helpful to first-year students who don't know what that feels like yet. Some people don't even know what a passion feels like, and it's pretty liberating once you realize, wow, I really like this topic. But I'd like to make the distinction between passion and opinions, because as you mentioned in your slide, the conservative opinion is a very small minority. And I wouldn't consider myself a conservative, but I certainly love to play devil's advocate in every conversation, even if I don't agree with it. And although I'm sure you all have wonderful opinions, I really don't want to know them, especially in the classroom, because I think that creates an atmosphere where people with dissenting opinions don't want to disagree with the teacher, especially. And it was really, really unique to me in my first year experience to have that feeling of, a hostility in a classroom. There's so much self-policing by other students as far as what other students can say, and that to me was very, very new and something that was really disheartening, especially because leading up to college, you say, wow, it's going to be this wonderful debate and everyone's going to have a different opinion and everyone's going to do this. I, for the first time in a classroom my freshman year, felt uncomfortable sharing my opinion. And now, like you said, AU students definitely still do share their opinion, and of course I did. It was still a really terrible feeling to have. So I think the role of a professor should be that neutral stance, and on top of that, to lend validity to dissenting opinions. Even if you don't agree with it, give it all of your will to say, wow, maybe this is right, and give us all the reasons. And then say, maybe this is right, and give us all the reasons. And then as a classroom or as individuals, we'll come to our conclusion. And those who do share those dissenting opinions will feel more passion to stand up and share theirs as well. And on top of that, I think the student-to-student relationship needs to improve. I think that was definitely, like I said, really just disheartening, and I really think about it. It sticks in my mind that I sat in a classroom, a college classroom, and didn't feel like I could share my opinion because of how my classmates would view me. So I think also when I reflect, two classes stand out to me very distinctly. Dr. Chin's classes. I had cross-cultural communication and transnational migration. And while the classes were very interesting, my first year seminar was at 8:55 Monday mornings until 11:35. And besides the attendance points, what drove me to class was that I saw her passion for the subject. And I wanted to prove that I could have a passion as well. And that really drove me to contribute more in the classroom. And of course, the student to faculty relationship is one where I think, this is my personal opinion, obviously interaction is very important, but I think that it's a mutualistic relationship where instead of trying to get us to engage in the classroom, try and get us to engage with yourself, and then together we'll create a classroom. Because nothing will be achieved if only one half is putting energy into the discussion. And so some more concrete things I would suggest to get us more engaged is to maybe even have mandatory one-on-one sessions if you have a smaller classroom, because that shows us the value of office hours. I really didn't take advantage of office hours my first year, which is a shame because now in the second year I realize how much of an advantage that could have provided me. And it can also show you as a professor some common interests we might have, and you can exploit those in the classroom to get us talking to one another. And of course, because once we've known each other, it's much harder to hide in the classroom. Some of my mistakes academically, like I said, I rarely used office hours and gave subpar energy because I wasn't invested in the topic, even though I liked it. So that's another thing. Don't assume we're invested in the topic, even though it's our major, and even though we know we want to get into that topic, in that subject, in that field. Don't assume we're all invested in it, at least not yet. And socially, like any freshman, I went out too much and I socialized too much. And I do think, though, that's okay, because I think on top of being college students, we're also becoming adults. And part of being an adult to me is learning yourself in relation to other people. And freshman year is certainly that kind of experience. So in order to circumvent that very easy path of lacking off, I socialized with more like-minded people who were driven like I was, and kind of unlocked that passion in one another, and learned that, of course, if you don't go to that party for the millionth time, you're not really missing out on anything. It's all the same every time. But most importantly, I searched for and found that former drive I had in high school that drove me to do those extracurriculars. And now I'm applying that in the undergraduate council and a few other positions. So that gives me a better view as to my next few years. So I'm looking forward to where these years are going to take me, and I'm glad I have such distinguished faculty to help me along the way. And I'm very happy that you're all listening to a student perspective. It's really great to contribute.
Thank
So
you,
thank
Tom. Thank you. And I'm taking some good notes, so I'll summarize what I'm hearing from different constituents. Laura will take us now to a faculty perspective on
Yeah,
this.
and being the stand-up people, it's just because I made these pretty slides and I like them. So hi, I'm actually glad to hear a student perspective too, and I think when you listen to me, you'll see that there are some ways in which it looks like Tom and I might have, cheated and collaborated in advance, and in ways in which I might offer perspective to guide him, and we'll see those differences. So partly in response, Tom, right, and all the students, you are as important as you were in high school. It's a shift from being important to your history teacher and your parents and your debate club to being important in the project of your life. And I think that's a huge difference in the transition both from high school to college, and college to adulthood. you mentioned something about, and this is going to be in what I've prepared, the challenges of what is this new thing? I'm supposed to find my passion. I didn't find it till second semester. Well, I hope you haven't actually yet. And this is what I'm going to say to my 129 Intro to CLEG students on the first day. And this is something I keep several printouts of in my office so I can hand it over in office hours. It's from a poet, Rilke. Has anyone read Letters to a Young Poet?
Yes.
Yeah. So you are so young, so before all beginning, and I want to beg you as much as I can to be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart, and to try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are written in a very foreign tongue. Do not seek the answers which cannot be given to you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day to the answer. I hope you haven't found the answer yet. It's probably not the answer you'll want to live with too long. Be patient. All right. So teaching first-year students, what I actually prepared. So as Tom said, I strongly believe we have to bring ourselves into the classroom. It's not about us. It's not a show. It's not entertainment. It's not the Lara program. But bringing ourselves in first engages the students, and second draws upon what we knew how to do before we started doing this. All right? All of us got good at stuff before. Learning a brand new job based on nothing you've ever been good at when you get into the classroom, I believe is a mistake. So the way that I think about it is, first of all, I hear a lot from professors, and I've actually talked to Marilyn Goldhammer about this, about the amount of guidance that you're supposed to give. Are you babysitting? Are you telling them too much? Are the instructions too explicit? And for me, the answer, like hers, is no, this is all scaffolding, right? Simone Biles, anybody watch her? She has a coach. That's her with her coach. And the story is she used to, jump off couches and tumble through the living room, and someone said, send her to a gym. But when she went, she found a coach. Yeah? Nobody comes to us just, maybe they know how to tumble off a couch, but we are coaches. And everything I know about being good at that, and everything I bring into the classroom, and frankly, parenting and a little bit of spousing, I learned from, honestly, me. My thing I was good at, before I was a lawyer, before I was a teacher, was teaching racehorses to be sport horses. They had a job to run counterclockwise very quickly. And that's all. And I want them to do other things. And being engaged in that process informs my teaching. It informs how I live. So let's have a look. Never get on a horse without finding out what she's done before. And never go into a classroom without getting a sense of what these people have gone before. I want to ask every single person, my 129 CLEGs, right? Advan. Oh, exactly what have you done? I have sent a Blackboard discussion already. I'm getting to know them a little bit online. But I'm learning more and more, and Fanta is helping with this, right, about what they've come in knowing how to do, and I'll talk about that. It's simple, but it's hard. It's the same thing in both columns. If we have simple and basic goals, we want more balance, we want more energy, we want more discipline, we want more focus. There are roots to that. It's hard to do, but if you're making it more complicated than it has to be, you might be doing it wrong. Don't let them trick you into doing it wrong. If they hate you, if they're mad because they got a C that they earned because they didn't exercise Tom's good judgment and skip that party, don't let them trick you into doing it wrong. Don't make them stand still for more than 5 seconds as a young horse thing. You got what you wanted. They stood still. Move on. Freshmen, yeah, you got to give assessments, but please give them opportunities to be excited. If they get distracted and restless, it's a sign you have to give them something more difficult to do. Yeah? My first years do moot court. That's a law school exercise. I actually just had 8th graders from Title I schools in DC do a moot court program I designed. It was hard as hell. They were terrified. All of my first-year students come in terrified to argue an appellate case before a panel of practicing attorneys, and all of them leave the room feeling like King Kong. If they're too distracted, give them something difficult to do. Especially if you do retrain a racehorse, really pay attention to that one. It's important. You don't want to end up like accidentally in Delaware in traction. Okay. Nothing beautiful is achieved by force. That's from Xenophon's Ancient Art of Horsemanship. Be a human being. You can't angry somebody into scholarship.
Yes.
I get angry, incidentally. I am offered abundant opportunities to be angry. Sometimes I'm honest about it, you know. What you guys did just sucked. What's happening in this classroom? It's okay. Yours is one of 5 classes. I learned this the hard way. I assign a lot of reading. I ask a lot. This year, I've actually, for the first time, I created an assessment calendar. All of the things that are assessments and are going to be graded in all 3 classes I'm teaching. I have 19 students who have overlaps who are taking 2 classes with me, God help them. You know, I know in advance it would be mean to give them midterms on the same day. I'm not going to do it. I have a calendar of assessments, and the students in my Intro to CLEG class, I'm actually going to give them a little extra bonus point if they make one too. Don't set consequences you don't enforce. If you mean it, if you say no extensions, classes don't, you know, I say don't carry a stick if you're afraid to use it, you know. Get out, gallop. Let them be happy about learning. Tom made a good point about this, right? If you think you don't need lessons, you're wrong. I go to CTRL. I just met with Joy Adams actually about Blackboard, and it took my temperature down, my blood pressure down 30 points. I asked Marilyn for help in CTRL. So what are we trying to do? We got to set objectives. We got to tell them what to expect, right? Tom mentioned this. What am I doing here? Ask for things that fulfill the actual objectives of the course. Tell them how they succeeded or failed. And instill an ethos of inquiry. Now, this is how I set standards for the course. This is what I use. Everybody's got something different. This is Bloom's taxonomy. Anybody use this? Yeah? So what I tell them is high school is here, demonstrate comprehension, yeah? And college all happens above it. You should walk into class comprehending. High school happens in your dorm room or in the library because you walk in comprehending, and we work on that. But I tell them what I'm asking you for is this higher order thinking. I give them this, I talk about this, we have a conversation. It's important to know what they can't do when they can't come in. 95% can't write a paragraph, by which I mean write an assertion that's provable and support it with evidence, and then don't do any more than that in that hunk of text. We need to work on that. Almost all of them struggle with asking questions, not just about their lives, but if I ask a question, what would you have to know in order to decide how to handle this issue, right? Like in a class where I'm talking about policy. What do you need to know when you decide whether your network should cancel this program starring this guy who said very, very racist things? You know, and you can rattle off some stuff. Well, I'd want to know who our viewership is. I want to know what the sponsors think. Very hard for them to generate that. And that's a very important foundational skill, right? How are they going to write a capstone if they don't know how to think about what hasn't been answered yet and what a question looks like and what a provable assertion looks like? We're going to spend most of my CLEG class this semester practicing answering questions, identifying questions, excuse me. Managing their time is difficult. I try to encourage them not to think of it as time management, which is very loosey-goosey. It's like eating healthy. I talk about it as project management. You have tasks. I strongly encourage, you know, incorporating some project management. Tom said this, most of them have only been prepared to be accepted to college. They haven't been prepared to do college. They know about exposition. They know about filling requirements that are very explicit, demonstrating comprehension. The big challenge is once that reason to study is gone, I got in, there's an existential, what the, And it leads to the conclusion that you might have noticed Tom say, now I got to prepare for life. I've had this conversation with some of my colleagues, something in between getting into college and life. Who knows what it is? College. College, right? If you don't say what college is for, they'll assume it's getting a job. And getting internships is a great way to get a job. It's not a great way to be happy at a job. It's not a great way to be useful at a job. But it's a great way to get one. And I used to work in organizations. I hired a lot of people and people, not everyone can do their job. Okay. So what do I want to build? I want skepticism. I want them to ask more questions. I want them to read something instead of saying, I disagree. I want them to look at it and say, what more do I need to know to even decide if this is any good? So the CLEG class this fall, the multidisciplinary class, we're going to start with the question, do you support free college as a proposal? And then we're going to spend the entire semester finding out all of the questions one would need to ask to answer that question in an informed manner. We're going to look at lots of things about K-12 education, some of the things Fanta might like about how well people, what they struggle with once they get to college, their financial aid, culture. And another challenge is the consumer mindset, right? That's the elephant in the room, is SETs. That's Katniss saying, I don't know how to make people like me. How do you make people like you? It's not your job. A lot of students like me. I'm a Girl Scout troop leader. My office hours overfloweth. But this is unfortunately too small. But I've got one. If you go find me on Rate My Professor. She's the best person ever and saved my life, and I can't even believe not everyone is exactly like her. And she's a megalomaniacal person who you just have to tolerate, and it's the worst thing that'll ever happen to you. And if those students, and both of those incidentally were posted right after I posted grids, and if those students were in front of me, I'd say, hey, not so fast, that's not a great review because it's not useful to others. You didn't refer directly to, you didn't make provable assertions. There's too many like adverbs and adjectives. You needed to cite directly to texts and experiences. So this is just not a well-crafted and useful thing. Instead, right, I'm old enough to partake of all kinds of coping products. So what can you do? Remember the goal. You want them motivated to be higher order scholars. And the only way to start that process is to be engaged in it. Be explicit about what the mission is. And that's true for physics or philosophy or for government. What are we trying to accomplish? Now, Tom mentioned this. Share your own journey. And it should include your failures. Whether you bombed your first college math class, you got to college and were surprised that you weren't the best Model UN person, whatever it is. If possible, tie the material to something that already matters to them. Now, in SPA, not too tough. All of them care about free college. They just signed a promissory note, right? Easy. Tougher some places. But it's doable, right? They care about inquiry. Involve them in a conversation about your learning community. I am starting the CLEG class with a letter that some students wrote to a professor at a law school about how terrible it was she wore a Black Lives Matter shirt to school, and her rebuttal, which is fantastic. I recommend it I'll send it to Fanta, I'll link to it. And we're going to talk about what it's my job to do. Is it my job to tell you, you absolutely can be conservative, I swear? Is it, promise, I promise, I promise? Is it my job to walk in and say, I just hatched from underneath the podium in Ward 2, and I have no life experience. There's nothing I believe, ever. And don't Google me because you'll find out I work for the radical homosexual agenda and it'll ruin my new car smell for you. Or am I a person? And do we have to get real about what I can deliver and what you should deliver in this learning community? What does it mean? What do you want? Do you want to be an adult? What does that mean for you? Right? And we can talk about that. That's worth spending a class on. I require them to practice. People being surprised by a midterm makes no sense. You could give them a practice question just like the midterm, then they'd know who has to go to office hours. I say everyone, by the way. I say, please come. I don't require it because I don't want to have to keep a piece of paper finding out who didn't come. But I tell them they should come. I remind them it's free, much like the syllabus. Finally, listen to feedback you get in real time and adjust accordingly. Especially with a new class, maybe the reading is too much. Maybe someone bombed your test. By the same token, if you happen to notice that some area of inquiry fascinates and captivates the students, go with it. It turns out my students care more about criminal justice than any other aspect of what I do in constitutional law. It's grown over the years, and I put 2 wildcard spots in SPA 220 for the end of the semester where the students decide what we're going to study next. I had to leave something out, right? People write books and books and books and classes on constitutional law. I've got more specific stuff around expectation setting. I have a lot of little products I give students, like a very clear statement of how I grade, what goes into an A, what makes good writing, adverbs are the enemy. And I can actually share those. But bottom line, this is my ingredients, and thanks for letting me stand and look very patriarchal. So,
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to start from a slightly different place. And I want to talk about what I really find so beguiling about first-year students. And oftentimes we find ourselves saying how they don't measure up, what they don't do, what they don't come with, what's wrong with them. And I always start from what's right with them. They're funny, they're bright, they are engaging, they are enthusiastic, they will read almost anything on the face of the planet if you give it to them and you show them how to read it. I profoundly disagree with the discourse that is circulating around them about resilience, that they lack resilience. I find that profoundly offensive. I found it imbued with assumptions about race and gender and class. It really upsets me. I find them to be resilient in ways that I don't think I could have been at their age. And I also disagree profoundly, and I'm a post-structuralist, so I disagree with everything. But I absolutely disagree with the narrative that they all expect a trophy. I have not found that to be the case. This is my 5th year teaching here at AU in SIS. I, every year, have been involved in the University College. I am deeply invested in our first-year seminar courses in SIS, which Christine Chin is a really significant part of. And I have not found these attitudes to be the case. I love first-year students, and I mean that in every sense of the word. I mean that in the sense that love is always compassionate and kind and understanding, but it also sets rules, and you're not afraid to say, no, that is not acceptable, and this is the standard. And yes, it's hard, and yes, it's challenging, but I'm going to show you how to get there. So for me, teaching is about finding, and I'm, to top things off, in addition to being a post-structuralist, I'm an IR theorist. So who could be more out there than me? And in many ways, all of my classes circle around IR theory. Now imagine teaching Foucault and Derrida and the whole host of characters to first-year students. Well, they love it, they ask for more, and they really find it engaging. So how do I do it? I do it in several ways. I think about myself as a coach, and I love the slide you put up with the gymnast, with Simone Biles. We have to think about ourselves, in a sense, as coaches. Break every component part of learning down into each of its micro pieces. So if you think about swimming, how many, how your arm comes out of the water, how your hand goes into the water, when your feet kick, where your legs are, where your head is. Think about that in terms of writing, in terms of reading, and in terms of critical dialogue in the classroom. Think about each of the segments so that in the course of a semester, you bring them to this concluding exercise where you have a clear pathway in mind, and each step along the way, you're guiding, you're prompting, you're not dropping the bar that they have to clear, but you're helping lift them up to be able to clear that bar. You assess often, you assess early, you give them writing assignments, you give them opportunities to give oral presentations in class, all of which you can give them short segments of feedback. But the important thing for me is to think about what each of the component parts look like and how I design a syllabus over the course of the semester. I'm going to read you a very short statement from a father who came to AU with his son, prospective student in SIS, and said to me toward the end of the semester, "I'd love to sit in on a class, do you have anything?" I'm like, holy cow. You know, I don't know who I could ask, and I said, wait a minute, I'm teaching my first year seminar. Why don't you come with me? You can sit in, you can get a sense of the students in AU. I did not know this guy was a professor. Had I known that, I'd have probably said, no thanks, sorry, can't accommodate. I'm not afraid to admit I'm chicken. So it is the last day of my first year seminar, and this will give you a sense of the way I teach. Each class, when I teach them, I try to find what are the conceptual things I want them to learn, what's the materials I'm going to give them that will help them learn that, documentary film, short pieces from PBS NewsHour, a couple pieces from the New York Times, a journal article, academic articles, book chapters. I try to create a rich and fertile mix of materials, art, music, I don't care what it is, poetry, so that I can tap into not only their intellectual sides, but their emotive sides. That's how you unleash their passions. You don't hide emotion in the classroom. You bring it in. You make it visible. It's part of the learning process. And each class then has some activity, the doing in the learning. Now, what do we do with this material? How am I going to structure some type of event for them to do in the classroom where they can actually apply what we've been learning, reading, and discussing? So I always think about, here's the thinking piece, here's the doing piece. What are we going to do? Let me give you a very short example. In my world politics class, I teach social constructivism. Yeah. Try teaching that to first-year students. What does social constructivism mean? What does it actually look like? So I give them the Hong Kong student protests. And I create a dynamic in class where I have a group of kids that are going to be my theorists. They're the kids that have reviewed social constructivism, so they're going to start the class, and they're going to highlight the key themes of social constructivism and what kinds of things we should be looking for. Then I have a group of students that role play the Hong Kong protesters. And then they go and they talk about, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's what our protests are about. Then we come back to our theorists, and our theorists say, oh, here's where you can see elements of social constructivism. See why the students are doing this, see why they're saying this. Then we have a group that role plays the Chinese Communist Party, and what's their role, and what are they doing and why. And the social constructivists say, see how they're now responding to the students? And so they're literally role-playing how social constructivism works. The last group can't not have them, the Hong Kong business interests, right? And so that's an example of turning theory into a doing of theory, where the students are actually performatively enacting it.